Satanism is a subject which has affected society on quite a profound level. All the way throughout the Middle Ages, during the witch trials, we can see references to necromancers, black magicians, sorcerers and witches. Today we look back at these deaths as unjust and the people who perpetrated them as, ironically, monsters themselves. And this is because we are so much further forward than we used to be and have so much better of an understanding and respect, and we never jump to conclusions. Or do we? Recent history may actually suggest that we're probably not as far forward as we think. From the satanic panic with fears of secret Satanists dwelling underneath the surface, secret societies, to very recently with the QAnon movement where these secret societies then get revealed to actually be celebrities and people in our popular media who apparently enjoy ritual sacrifice and consuming adrenochrome produced from a fearful victim's blood. People who carry out ritual sacrifice for some kind of otherworldly or just even worldly gain. But of course these are so far from the witch trials, and it would be ludicrous to say that we would ever commit such atrocities again, wouldn't it? So guys, welcome back to this series, Searching for Satanism, where I deep dive into the conspiracy theories surrounding the topic of Satanism. I'd like to start by thanking you guys for your support so far. I do understand my videos are quite obscure, so I was quite surprised at the reception I received from my first two videos, and I do truly hope you get the same fulfillment out of this video with this one as opposed to the previous two videos, which if you haven't watched you should definitely do so. They were on the topic of grimoires. This one I'm going to be diving into the character of Satan himself and finding out a bit more about this character, where we get the ideas of this character from, and has this character stayed the same? Has he remained consistent from when he was initially incepted to today? Or has he changed? But before I do get into the video, please do subscribe to the channel if this is a topic that interests you. I'm going to be doing this as a regular topic. Once again, this is also a music channel, so I'm going to be doing a bit of that as well if that's your kind of speed. I have actually got some requests to start putting some of my music into my videos, so that's probably something that I'm going to be doing with this one. Hopefully you'll be hearing it right now.
Today it's my privilege to host this program on a little-known area in law enforcement, but important to every small community and every large city across our vast country. It's the area of satanic cults.
Let me tell you, so the lyrics to real rock music is nothing more than satanic cyanide.
Parents worried about rock's alleged drug, violence, and satanic impact on the young picketed outside Kemper.
Parents saw their child summon the Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself.
You may not like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm not afraid to speak out. It reminds me of the wild man of Gadara in Mark chapter 5 who was possessed of a demon.
Pallenberg-sponsored Lucifer Rising, a movie that showed, quote, the actual ceremonies to make Lucifer rise. But the fact that virtually every example of this type of backmasking conveys a message that is intrinsically demonic. Aleister Crowley was one of the most infamous Satanists of our modern age.
Running around in the graveyard naked and cutting himself with stones and screaming. Demon possession.
Through killing people through various rituals that are against the law in our states and in our country.
Death.
So before I get stuck into this topic, I would actually like to address a couple of criticisms that I received, namely because they're quite interesting to delve into, and I do feel like there's kind of a point here, although it might be kind of a bit misjudged. So two of the criticisms that I received for my first two videos were my description of a satanic cult is too vague, and by it being too vague I'm almost creating kind of a straw man argument. And to this I do kind of agree, my description is quite vague, and by it being quite vague it could be considered to be a straw man argument. However, I'm going to argue that it is not, and let me just explain why. So let's just start with, my description of a pervasive satanic cult that's existed since the beginning of Christianity or before, that is in all the high places in government and enacts satanic ritual rites. in order to satisfy some kind of either personal gain or supernatural one. Yeah, it is quite vague. However, this isn't a problem for my argument, this is a problem for conspiracy theorists, because this is the most general description I can find from every conspiracy theorist, because most of the descriptions of a satanic cult, a pervasive one, do not line up. Everyone's got their own idea about what it is. It's really the Satanic Temple. Oh, it's really the Church of Satan. Oh, actually, neither of those are satanic. It's actually something a lot older. However, the people I've kind of spoken to about this still haven't really been able to direct me towards an actual satanic cult. They have just said that there is one out there somewhere, apparently. But the thing is, the burden isn't on me to prove a negative. I can't prove that a satanic cult does not exist, and that's not the aim of these videos. I'm not here to prove that it doesn't exist. I'm here to debunk the theories that it does exist. The burden is on the conspiracy theorist to prove the positive. So if we're trying to figure out, well, okay, where have I got my vague description of a pervasive satanic cult from? Like, am I just pulling this out of thin air? Well, let's have a quick look at some positive claims that have been made. Around 2016, Alex Jones hugely pushed the now debunked Pizzagate conspiracy theory relating to Planet Ping Pong Pizza, where he claimed that there was a satanic sex trafficking ring in operation in secret tunnels which were discovered to have never existed by a follower of the QAnon movement who showed up to the place of business with a rifle. David Icke, a well-known conspiracy theorist, made a claim that celebrities claims of a satanic cabal, sometimes referred to as the Illuminati, in order to harvest the Babylonian Brotherhood, ex-conspiracy theorist Brent Lee stated that during his time as a believer, this year, Boyzone singer Shane Lynch accused Taylor Swift in his interview with Sunday working together to establish a new satanic rituals at her shows. In 2022, again, Alex Jones stated 9 hours each stretch. In 2015, parents teachers alien and religious going on in the community of North London school were accused and harassed by conspiracy theorists for alleging. In the 1990s, a paper-mache effigy was burned care ceremonies and ceremonies. This proof of Jones believed this to be the Al God Moloch originated Moloch into the grove, usually not depicted as an owl, by the way. The stories of Jones's reaction believes this small grove and there was huge owl statue that actually believes there will be an owl satanic. In his book, Behold a Pale Horse, despite the dramatic imagery, no one existence of the oldest secret society, being the Brotherhood of the Snake, who are devoted to guarding the secrets of the ages, and to the recognition of Lucifer as the one and only true God. If you're interested in where I got any of the references for that from, I have listed them down below. However, they're pretty easy to find, so I don't think anyone's going to have any trouble with that one. We can see that there are lots of conspiracy theories about a satanic cult. Even as far back as the witch trials, we can see certain people like Cotton Mather, who is one of the contemporary sources of the Salem witch trials, where we get a lot of the documentation from for that period of time, even stating that he believed that there was the Antichrist who is currently active within their communities, and he was coming to the end of his life cycle. So this was something that had been going on for a long time before. And once again, David Icke, with his description of the Babylonian Brotherhood, he describes them as worshipping gods of the ancient world. And sure, these are fairly vague descriptions of a satanic cult. They're very, very colourful, definitely given. I mean, some of Alex Jones's ones are pretty astounding, to be honest, but they're still quite vague. But again, this is an issue for conspiracy theories in general, and isn't an issue for the refutation of conspiracy theories. I suppose really the main reason why I don't actually consider the arguments that I made in my first two videos to be strawmans is I used to actually believe it. I was a conspiracy theorist since I was a very, very young child. It was what I grew up believing. Another story entirely, but I grew up believing a lot of conspiracy theories. There aren't many conspiracy theories that I am not aware of. However, from taking the old conspiracy theory proverb of do your own research, I did my own research, and my research proved my theories wrong. So generally, to anyone who's saying, oh, this is a straw man, it's not. I believed it. I'm taking you guys through almost kind of the journey that I went through to find that this was a load of bollocks. And you can either come along with me, or you can call me a shill. Someone called me a shill in the comments on one of my last videos. That is quite an honour. I didn't know I was well known enough to actually be a shill, so here we go. At some point, everyone's going to be a fucking shill. In all honesty, I do have to say, thank you to the conspiracy theorists out there that said do your own research. I did, and do you know what, my life is actually a lot better off because of it. So now that I've had my little rant, let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of this video. So welcome to this installment of Searching for Satanism. I'm calling this one affectionately The Devil's in the Details. I did want to call it The Origin of Satan, because this video is heavily referenced from the Elaine Pagels book, The Origin of Satan, but I thought that was kind of ripping off. So The Devil in the Details kind of works for this purpose, I feel. I would like for you watching out there in the comfort of your own home to kind of see this video as a bit of a kind of like analysis of the character of Satan and why we fear him, what he actually means. Is the character something on his own, or is he part of something bigger? And, you know, why we still have fear of Satan today. I mean, I'm going to say, as someone who's been an atheist throughout the majority of my life, still the idea of Satan I find inspires an incredible feeling of terror and fear. It is something that is so ingrained into our society, we can't really shake it. So let's start where we might see the kind of origination of the character of Satan, where we can see the most definitive description of him. You may say, the Bible, you fool. And you would not be wrong to assume this. However, the Bible doesn't actually have a lot of description about the character of Satan. He's certainly described in the Bible, and there are lots of references to the beast and to hell and to the fall and all this really powerful biblical imagery. However, it's not very well kind of expanded on. He is a character, he exists in the Bible, but who is he, where does he come from, and why is he something that is so important? Really, we don't even see a lot of expansion on the actual character of Satan until we kind of get to Milton and Paradise Lost, where he's almost described as a form of a protagonist. Now in this video there's going to be a lot of talk about kind of language. I mean, a language is a fantastic element. You know, we have assigned certain sounds and symbols to thoughts so we can understand one another. However, these sounds and these symbols can change over time and have evolved throughout multiple different civilizations. And what they may mean at one point in time, they may mean a completely different thing into the future. This is going to be a recurring theme of this video. We're going to be going into the etymology of some words, trying to find out what they actually mean, you know, particularly relating to the character of Satan. You know, why do we use some of these words so haphazardly? And it's really important to keep that in mind as we move forward into this topic. Now, the word Satan is one that we kind of use interchangeably today with things like Beelzebub, the devil, Lucifer, you know, maybe even demons if you want to get really, you know, really general with it. You know, Satan as being part of a general league of demons. However, all these words themselves have also changed, and they didn't have the same meaning at one point in time as they do today. Unlike the Christian Old Testament or the New Testament for that matter, in the Hebrew Bible, Satan is not a name but a word. In early Jewish traditions, actually, the idea of hell, Satan, Satan the name, that is, and demons weren't really a concept. You won't find any reference to them in the Hebrew Bible. Satan was in fact instead a word for a role, an adversarial role, where the Satans would be sent by God to specifically obstruct human activity. In fact, the word diabolos, which would later be translated to devil, the Greek word actually means one who throws something across one's path. Now, where this actually becomes relevant is in the Hebrew Bible, the supernatural entity, the Satan, would be sent by God to obstruct someone from going down a potentially bad path. A great example of this, and one of the weird ones, is the talking ass, where Balaam in the book of Numbers sets off on a path which God does not wish him to go. God then sends down his Satan to obstruct the path. The man's donkey sees the Satan and refuses to go any further. Obviously, anyone who's familiar with the story will be aware that this is the point. The man starts to beat the donkey, and then it starts talking to him. After this, the noble steed manages to talk Balaam down off of his high horse. God then allows Balaam to see the Satan. The Satan then proceeds to inform him that if his donkey did not decide to turn around, the Satan would have in fact killed Balaam. And the Satan would also later go on to take other adversarial forms, such as trying to set up a bet with God to see if he could shake Job's faith, and God actually taking him up on the bet. The Satan in the Hebrew Bible is more of kind of an angelic character. He is an emissary of God. He does the work of God. However, later on, this does start to change. In Elaine Pagels' book, The Origin of Satan, she kind of describes this event which kind of happens within the Hebrew communities, where they start warring, different factions start warring with each other, and this is kind of blamed on the action of Satan's. It's important to remember that while today we kind of see Judaism in a similar way that we see kind of Christianity and Islam and essentially the numerous other religions which are around today, it is important to keep in mind that at this point in time, Judaism was actually more of a nationality identifier. In fact, Christianity was quite unique in the fact that it didn't require you to be part of one nationality. In the Jewish religion at this point in time, there were God's chosen people, who were the Israelites, and then there was the Gentiles, who were not God's chosen people. So this is probably a good opportunity to start introducing the idea of the we versus they and the human versus non-human mentality. In Elaine Pagels' book, she references anthropologist Robert Redfield's argument that there is essentially a worldview of many people which consists of two binary positions, so human and non-human, and we versus they. The argument then goes on to say that these worldviews usually correlate to an idea of essentially we equals human and they equals non-human. And we can kind of see this with the mentality of we are God's chosen people and the Gentiles are not God's chosen people. It is kind of like an in-group, out-group scenario. Now, this is quite interesting because we can start to see, as mentioned before, with the Satans apparently sowing dissent within the Israelite communities, that this doesn't remain an in-group, out-group scenario. The we versus they mentality kind of pivots essentially inwards, and it becomes almost like a fear of ourselves. It's not necessarily a fear of the outgroup, it's a fear of an outgroup within the in-group. And we can see this as Pharisees at the time were mainly focused on the idea of Israel against the nations. However, as time went on, we can see the introduction of more extreme movements within Judaism, such as the Essenes. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And this would bring into the question which Jews were on the side of God and which had sided with the nations. And this is where we can kind of begin to see the term Satanism characterizing opponents within Judaism. This is in fact where we start seeing almost a move entirely to more what we see in the New Testament, not really as Satan as an emissary of God, but Satan as a direct opponent to God. Now, the dissidents who would kind of pose this new interpretation created their own stories and kind of described these otherworldly powers and how they fell from heaven into sin due to the arrogance of lust, of what I suppose can now be seen as like demons or devils. As centuries go past and there's more stories and more writings, this is now what we see as Satan and his demons. And the interesting thing, I suppose, is Pagels describes the idea of the problem of evil in her book as essentially originating from sibling rivalry, and she references an apocryphal text which shows the character of Satan essentially as an angel becoming jealous of Adam, stating he will not bow to one who is younger than him. So we've been kind of talking about how the idea of Satan relates to Judaism and the people of Israel, back at this point in time, and it's not surprising really, because the idea does really start with the Hebrew text. It is a Hebrew word, and it starts within the Jewish communities of the time, and it kind of expands out just once again from that emissary of God to this wider evil, malevolent figure. However, this idea doesn't stop with the Jews. This does go into what we're going to start addressing next, which is Christianity. During the time of Christ, it is not surprising that many of his followers actually identified themselves as being Jewish, and even Jesus himself was identified as someone who was Jewish, the King of the Jews. And in the New Testament, Jesus describes how he's looking to fulfill what has come before described in the Old Testament. As time goes on, the Jewish community that have been following Jesus start worshipping at home rather than synagogues, and he starts getting followers who come from philosophical backgrounds rather than strictly religious ones, and even people who are Hellenistic or pagans start following Jesus, start following the teachings of Jesus. And on the surface, this seems like a good move. We've kind of moved away from like a strictly sort of ethnic basis for a religion. We've moved more to really a worldwide idea, something that's all accepting and something that doesn't exclude anyone for, you know, any past beliefs they've had. You don't have to be born a Christian, you don't have to be Christian in ethnicity, you can come from anywhere and be Christian. And we would almost think that this would kind of start eroding the in-group and out-group mentality. However, this is not the case, and it actually strengthens. We begin to see Satan versus God, the eternal cosmic battle between good and evil. To quote Elaine Pagels' book again, she describes, for many readers of the Gospels ever since the 1st century, the thematic opposition between God's spirit and Satan has vindicated Jesus' followers and demonized their enemies. Now this is where we start getting into the fun topic, the topic that everyone loves to discuss, the death of Christ. Now the actual events surrounding the death of Christ are very highly debated, and scholars don't fully agree on who is actually supposed to be responsible for the death of Christ. I think generally it's now accepted that it was the Romans. However, that's not what's in the Gospels, and what's actually kind of described is that, particularly in the Gospel of Mark, that it was in fact the Jewish scribes and the Sanhedrin that were responsible for the death of Jesus, and the Romans and Pontius Pilate were essentially acting almost as conduits of their will. And even before the death of Christ, we can see a lot of tension within the Christian and Jewish communities, as essentially the Council of Elders, the Sanhedrin, and the Jewish scribes, they're denying the validity of Jesus as the Messiah. And the Gospel of Mark kind of creates a bit of, I would say, positive PR for Pontius Pilate. Wow, that was a lot of P's. Describes Pontius Pilate as having his hand forced by the Council of Elders, and ending up executing Jesus, even though apparently he didn't want to. In Matthew 27, it describes Jesus before Pilate. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two would you like me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere but an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." Quite literally washing his hands of the whole thing. I do actually even believe that is where the phrase comes from. But this narrative of Pontius Pilate essentially being intimidated and led into crucifying Jesus is at odds with other historical records of his character. We have actually multiple sources of both Jewish and Roman, which describe Pilate as a ruthless and brutal character who, rather than being someone who could have easily been swayed by an unruly crowd, would in fact suppress unruly crowds aggressively. He was known to hold many executions without trial. Dennis Nineham, who is a biblical scholar and an ordained minister, describes the event of Mark's 14:53 to 72, where Jesus is brought before the Sanhedrin so they could bring the evidence against him, was to show that the execution of Christ was the work of the Jews, and these verses are to specifically show that his death was a direct result of their actions, which they were fully aware of. If simply denying the Messiah was not enough to put the Jews into the outgroup category, the claims made in Mark certainly would have had this effect, and this would be proven into the Middle Ages with the Jews almost universally being accused of deicide, this narrative persisting for nearly 2,000 years within the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church would only repudiate this narrative in 1964 as part of the Church's reform discussed during the Vatican II Council. I really want you to let that sink in. That is nearly 2,000 years where it hasn't even been challenged that the Jews were responsible for deicide. And only in 1964 does the same church who included this narrative in their canon decided to repudiate it. I think Too Little Too Late doesn't even really cover this. Now, I'm sure that most of us are aware that there are actually many conversations that have been had as to which Gospels should be included in the final canon. But there was a lot of conversation about which Gospels should be excluded from this canon. There's a lot of apocryphal texts that we know about today, which were decided were not canon and were completely excluded when discussed at the Council of Nicaea. And we can see many things such as the Nag Hammadi library, which contained essentially apocryphal and often Gnostic beliefs that would be later classed as heresy by the orthodox representatives of Christian Catholicism. Now, the word heresy actually comes from the Greek word hairesis, meaning to choose. I suppose the fascinating thing about Christianity at this period is that while we can see that they were most certainly concerned without groups such as pagans and Jews, however, heresy within the religion was just as much of a concern, if not more. There's a Bible passage which actually sums this up quite nicely in 2 Corinthians, where Paul says, "Even Satan himself disguises himself as an angel of light, so it is not strange that his servants disguise themselves as servants of righteousness." And it's interesting because it's quite apparent that not all Christians actually wish to follow the complete orthodox beliefs of Christians at the time. We actually see a letter attributed to the Bishop Clement in the 2nd century, where he describes the unholy rebellion of people who are not following the superior authority of the priests. So let's kind of do a brief summary of what we've seen so far. So we can kind of see this we versus they mentality, the human versus non-human mentality, and it's kind of prevalent throughout almost every religion. Even the pagans were not free of kind of doing this. They themselves did this quite often. However, when it comes down to Judaism and Christianity, this is where we start seeing the we versus they, human versus non-human, God versus Satan, all kind of coming together into this nicely wrapped up little package. And a lot of the time, initially, the out-group is the out-group, people who are not of this religion. But eventually, this kind of really implodes and starts becoming a in-group and out-group within the in-group. And then we start seeing these people who are not following the correct form of Christianity as heretical, oppositionary, adversarial, and then by that definition, diabolic, satanic. And if we can see this here within like the early days of Christianity, can we see this later on? Can we see this continue as the religion develops? Well, in fact, we can. And sadly, the tensions between Christians and Jews wouldn't actually stop here. They would in fact inflame and become even bigger problems as time went on. Going through the history of anti-Semitism throughout the medieval period is incredibly in-depth. This topic really does deserve its own full video to really show how impactful and horrific this subject was and is still to this day. For the sake of this video, I'll be giving a very short rundown of the main historical events which encompassed anti-Semitism in the Middle Ages. And I do also want to bring this back to the main topic. How does anti-Semitism relate to the character of Satan? How is this relevant? Well, as we've seen, the idea of who Satan is always appears to be intrinsically linked with the people who are accused of worshipping him. What would go a long way to further inflame this would be the subsequent demonization of deities from the paganistic religions of the time, but also the names of God, which would be then changed to a more demonic tone, such as Baal or Baal, literally meaning owner or lord, or El Berith, meaning a god of the covenant, and of course there are many others. A little trick to kind of find out whether or not something was considered a god in a Hebrew religion. If it is a Hebrew word and it has El on the end, El is, from what I understand, Esoteric has actually explained this more in depth in one of his videos. El is essentially the shorthand name for God. So when we look at Israel, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, all these names, if it has L on the end, it usually means of God. We can start seeing the development of the anti-Semitic canon truly taking place after the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, in particular with the debate over Passover being separated from Easter due to the argument between Quartodecimanism, which was practiced by Christians in Jerusalem, which was essentially worshipping Easter on the 14th day of the first month of Nisan, which is considered essentially the first religious month. Usually this aligns around March or April time with the modern calendar, and essentially it aligns with the Jewish Passover. And then this was kind of being compared with the practice that developed in Rome which was to worship Easter on the first Sunday due to the religious significance of the Sunday as the day of the resurrection. The deicide accusation fully really cemented its way into the controversy surrounding Easter when the Roman Emperor Constantine declared it was resolved by the united judgment for all present that this feast ought to be kept by all and every place on one and the same day. For what can be more becoming or honourable to us than this feast, from which we date our hopes of immortality, should be observed unfailingly by all alike, according to one ascertained order and arrangement? And first of all, it appeared an unworthy thing that in the celebration of this holy feast we should follow the practice of the Jews, who have impiously defiled their hands with enormous sin, and are therefore deservedly afflicted with blindness of soul. For we have it in our power, if we abandon their custom, to prolong the due observance of this ordinance to future ages, by a truer order, which we have preserved from the very day of the Passion until the present time. Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd, for we have received from our Saviour a different way. I think it's very apparent the seething anti-Semitism which is kind of coming out of this comment. The hatred towards Jews of this time was absolutely unrivaled. Constantine would then later go on to endorse several laws against Jews, prohibiting them from owning Christian slaves. Not that owning slaves in any relation is a good thing, but I assume Christian slaves could own Jewish ones. Mixed marriages, building synagogues. Constantine also declared that it was a crime punishable by death to convert a Christian to Judaism. Emperor Justinian would go on to enforce and expand these laws by making it clear that Jews will enjoy no civil rights, cannot testify against Christians, and restricted the use of Hebrew in their prayers. Historically, the rumours of blood libel against the Jews originated when a boy known as William of Norwich was discovered in 1144 AD. Due to the body being found on Easter and so close to Passover, the Jewish community were almost immediately accused of the crime. They faced accusations by the people of Norwich for ritually murdering William. Many of the accusations claimed that the murder was performed in the same manner that Jesus was tortured and killed. William of Norwich wasn't even the last accusation of ritual murder associated with the Jewish community. It was very shortly followed by accusations of the murder of Harold of Gloucester in 1164, Robert of Bury in 1181, and later the murder of little Saint Hugh of Lincoln in 1255. This is not by a long stretch an exhaustive list. These accusations eventually led to incidents such as the attack on the Jews at Richard the Lionheart's coronation in 1189, and the London, York and Bury massacres of the Jews from 1189 to 1190. The massacres did not stop here, as we can see continuing massacres of the Jews throughout Europe, accusations of causing the Black Death by poisoning wells, and the executions of multiple Jews for further blood libel accusations. This was insane. And what I think horrifies me, and it's not really necessarily even a topic for this video, but this is still going on today. These accusations haven't gone away, and we will see in later videos that these accusations are still, they're still here. They haven't gone. We're still talking about blood libel accusations which were completely unfounded, never shown to be true, and resulted in the massacres of massive portions of the Jewish population for over 1,000 years. And a lot of these accusations were based on a similar kind of myth to the deicide hatred that was perpetrated towards the Jews, which is, once again, over 2,000 years old. And some of these children, for being killed by the murderers of Christ, were hailed as martyrs and saints for the religious cause. Honestly, I think it's a great thing that the children were remembered because it is so tragic, but the fact that people could turn something so horrific as the death of a child into a tool for persecution against a race of people is honestly horrifying. Now, with the existence of blood libel comes probably one of the most significant developments of the character of Satan, which is obviously why we are talking about it in this video. From the emissary of God obstructing humans from going down the wrong path, to a character challenging God's authority, entering into bets with him, sowing dissent within the Jewish communities, to influencing Jews to commit deicide, according to the Gospel of Mark. And now we have something even more sinister. The idea that somehow through the killing of Jesus, Satan has taken the role as a deity, demanding sacrifice of children, demanding a recreation of the events of Jesus' death. Satan has now almost become a god of evil. And now I just want to make this clear before I get any comments saying, oh, there's nothing saying that the Jews were satanic. No one ever said that the Jews were Satanists. Well, no, not strictly. No one said, oh, Jews are Satanists. That's not written anywhere. However, it is definitely inferred that those who do not follow the way of Christ and those who do not follow the way of God as interpreted by Christians must follow the way of the other. By differing from Christianity, even within the religion of Christianity, you can be a heretic, and heretics are demonic and satanic by definition. So we can make this inference that by a very roundabout manner, Jews were being labelled as Satanists. And regardless of if they weren't being labelled strictly as Satanists, they were certainly getting accused of ritual sacrifice and deicide, a lot of the things that we associate with Satanists today. So I'm going to have to wrap this video up here. There's actually a lot more to talk about. This video is not done, this is one part. As with my last one, I've got a bit of a habit of doing this. I'll say, oh, I'm just gonna make one video, and then I start writing the script and it turns into a 10,000 word script that I can't fit into a 40-minute video. So I'm gonna wrap this video up here, and in the next video I'm gonna be talking about the Knights Templar, and this is gonna be moving on into Dante's Inferno and Milton, and we're going to be discussing more in here. I know we've been focusing a lot on kind of the original text of Christianity, and let me make it really clear, I'm not looking for a debate on atheism versus Christianity. I don't care. If you want to have an argument with atheism versus Christianity, there's plenty of atheist channels, you can argue with them. This one, I'm just interested in the history of it. If you disagree, please do comment. I do really encourage people to comment, but if you're going to make any claims, do cite them. I see a lot of people making very out there claims in my comments, and I know I'm kind of asking for it. I'm trying to debunk conspiracy theories, so I know I'm asking for it. I used to be a conspiracy theorist. Look, I get it, guys, I get it. But if you are actually going to do something, please cite it. Once again, thank you for watching this video. Thank you so much. If you've reached the end of this, honestly, kudos to you. I've received some lovely comments, and it's really made me very excited about continuing this series with you guys, and I cannot wait to get stuck into the next part. We're going to be talking about fucking Baphomet. I cannot wait for it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you've liked it, please do like and subscribe. If you're new to the channel, check out my other videos. I've got 2 over 40-minute videos on grimoires. If you like this stuff, go and check them out. We're going to be having more videos on this soon. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.